Hello and welcome to the PolitiBabble Christmas Newscast. We've got a very special guest with us today, Devon Watson, Douglas Councillor and member of the Manx Labour Party. As usual, I'm joined by
Samuel
and Brisha Shaw.
Oh, and I'm Archibald Elliott. Forgot to mention that fact. The least important fact there, obviously.
Okay.
Yeah. Or we could say the most important. Who knows?
We'll breeze past it. So Devon, you wanted to talk about, well, first of all, how are you?
I'm doing well. It's been a busy period. Being involved with council at the moment, our biggest objective at the moment is trying to fight the ban on evictions coming up. The government is lifting its ban on evictions, which means as though we're probably going to see an increase in homelessness or a potential increase in people losing their homes. Probably not very cheery, but it's something that we're involved with at the moment, and it's consuming a bit of time.
Yeah, and just in case anyone listening doesn't know, do you just want to explain briefly your job in Douglas Council?
Yes, so in Douglas Council, I am a town councillor, just recently elected 2 months ago, going up for election in May again, so that should be a lot of fun. Main priorities there are sort of improving and sort of dealing with the housing crisis and sort of promoting a new type of politics in the Isle of Man, where we focus not only on bringing in innovative policies from around the world, rather than just copying the same sort of failed model that we see repeated in England, but then also moving towards sort of how can we share the wealth of the island amongst the people.
Okay, yeah.
Wow.
So you mentioned, obviously, which is the problem to do with the evictions that could be coming up, which is obviously a very pressing issue on the island. Do you want to explain a little bit on the background of that? So why has it gotten to this stage? What is causing this level of risk of mass eviction?
Well, generally over the coronavirus pandemic, the government wisely decided to ban evictions in the middle of a pandemic, especially since people have been hit with economic problems that are far beyond their control.
Yeah, and that's part of what has helped the island cope so well with COVID, comparatively.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the reasons. If we had let people sort of fall into poverty or homelessness as sort of like unemployment temporarily spiked massively, we would have had a situation where people's long-term earnings would have been hit. And it's a lot more expensive for the Manx economy to sort of pick someone up when they're all the way down there to the point where they need to use homeless shelters rather than keeping them in their homes. Yeah. It's also fundamentally unfair to punish kids and leave them sort of like on the streets if their parents happen to be in poverty. It's a lottery of birth. No one chooses where they're born, you know?
Yeah. So, just so listeners can get an idea, if nothing is done, if the ban on evictions is lifted, what would be the scale of the problem we're looking at?
It ranges, right? Best case scenario, nothing happens, and currently we've not really seen a government response to repair. So this is what we're hoping for. We're hoping that the amount of evictions are low enough to the point where it doesn't have a massive impact. What we can see already, anecdotally from people, is people are already lining up to go to the courts on Boxing Day or the day after Boxing Day to immediately start ramming some evictions through. It could end up as bad as a few hundred people on the streets. We have absolutely no idea at this point because the government doesn't really collect data on precariousness with homelessness. Essentially what we want is either a continuation on the ban of evictions or for the government to come up with a plan. This is very centre of the road policy. Just come up with a plan to sort of accommodate around this.
And has the Manx government done anything at all?
Not that we can see. I mean, we've spoken to some housing charities, and at places like Gry, they've got about 10 spaces left. I mean, the way Gry houses people, homeless shelter, it's air mattresses in a basement, and they've literally run out of space. They don't have much more capacity to deal with a massive increase. And housing charities in general do get treated like they've got infinite capacity, and that is unwise. Additionally, the local council doesn't have any more beds or spaces to keep people in, so we need to focus heavily on sort of making sure that things are fine. Hopefully things will be fine, but we have no way of knowing really.
Can I just ask a question in relation to the current eviction crises you're talking about? Obviously, those eviction crises because landlords aren't getting rent. Is the government maybe paying that rent for the tenants of that building? I don't know what's happening with that along there.
No, I mean, so like a lot of tenants might be paying reduced rent at the moment A lot of tenants might be in arrears. Some might not be able to pay much at all. Most people I've spoken to who are in crisis are paying as much as they can in the short term. But the government doesn't seem to be doing this. I mean, the government does help out if you already are in the benefit system. It already does help cover a large chunk of your rent. But with the scale of the problem with the housing crisis in Douglas, with the fact that we don't have enough cheap housing, I mean, you can see rents climbing up not only in Douglas but in Ramsey as well, hitting up to a third to half, and in some areas, if you happen to have kids, up to 2/3 of your income is just chowed up in rent.
Yeah, I can see the point there. Obviously, the crisis does need to be dealt with, but I'm sure you'd agree that the landlords themselves, some of them will have mortgages on the place they are renting, and if they aren't getting the income from the tenants, they can't pay the mortgage, or they can't fund their own lives, because you might retire and your retirement income is property, and people rent out their property.
Fair enough, right? But every month that you end up paying the mortgage into, it's not like the landlord is losing money in the long term, right? Because long term, they put money into that mortgage, and when that mortgage is paid off...
But they can't pay off the mortgage.
I mean, they've also
That's
engaged
the
in an
problem.
investment at the end of the day, right? I mean, if you lose money in the stock market, the government isn't going to bail you out. This is the only industry in which there's an expectation that regardless of economic conditions outside, that your investment remains steady. They've decided to make this gamble, and it is unfortunate. Maybe there should be some sort of support for these folks. But then you also do have a lot of landlords, like Abrams, that leave people in absolutely atrocious, horrifying conditions. I mean, and I don't have much sympathy for people who leave tenants or leave kids in places where it's like black mold in the walls or like serious amounts of damp.
Obviously, that should be then dealt with through building regulation. Hopefully, building regulations will be changed to stop that tenancy happening, because you can't force people to live in kind of uninhabitable environments. But it's more those that there are. If you extend the eviction ban on evictions happening, you then do have that loss of income. So maybe the government should then maybe start helping these people towards the rent to ensure that kind of everyone then has they can live in the house, they have housing, and the landlords are kind of getting the payment.
Yeah, I mean,
they've been missing for the past maybe 9 months.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think people should be supported. And I mean, if they don't have an income, we don't want anyone to lose their mortgage. I mean, that's obviously something that we're very heavily against. Most people I speak to, most tenants, or at least some of those who are most at risk, they're still paying in. I mean, at least enough to cover the mortgage. Maybe not enough for the landlord to make a large profit at the end of the day, but enough to at least cover the mortgage. I mean, ideally, what we'd like to see is people be made secure. We don't want the short-term hit of a pandemic means that people get foreclosed on. And we've got no problem with landlords. There are many, many good landlords, many people who are just investing because they've made a bit of money at the end of the day. Fine, crack on. I mean, the government should help people out if they're in a bad way.
So obviously, a short-term solution would be to extend the ban on evictions. Long-term, how do we start to address problems like this that are very prevalent in somewhere like Douglas?
The best way to do this would be to not only invest in our council housing stock to make it sort of fit for standard, but then secondly to massively expand it. I mean, if we look at places that have dealt with their own housing crises, two crop up: Vienna and Singapore. So Vienna and Singapore have created really strong, inclusive housing solutions by increasing the stock of government housing, and they charge it variable rents. So they have some really high-end properties, and they use the rents from those properties to cross-subsidize and sometimes even profitably run lower-end housing as well. So increasing our stock of council housing to the point that everybody has access to affordable housing would be good. I mean, if we look at this long-term, what's the trajectory from this? If 10 years ago your housing took up a third of your income, then today it takes up half, and in 10 years it takes up 2/3 of your income, we're going to see every other consumer industry in the Isle of Man eventually get gobbled up by the need to meet housing costs. I mean, if I can't go out to the pub, if I can't sort of like socialise with my friends, if I can't go on holidays, you've got all of these other industries down the road that get massively cannibalised by the need to expand an ever-increasing housing need. And it's not as if the housing stock or the housing quality itself is massively increasing.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that I mean, that makes sense. So it's obviously for the sake of the people that we need to address these problems, but it's also long term economically for the island. We can't allow a crisis like this to unfold.
Exactly. I mean, because if you look at where does middle class wealth come from, eventually you guys yourselves are going to be buying your own homes or whatever. But the cornerstone of middle class wealth, the largest asset you'll buy is two assets. Is A is your pension fund, and B, more importantly, is buying and owning your own home one day. And if home ownership is growing increasingly out of reach, then what is the future of the Manx or maybe even the British middle class going forward? If housing is viewed merely as a commodity good, for as much of it to be bought up by wealthy investors right now as possible, and sometimes in many cases left to deteriorate, then the quality or the capacity for people to enter into the middle classes is massively, massively hurt.
But how would you sorry, I forgot to put my mic on. How would you propose to manage that cost of housing? So how would you kind of propose to manage that price?
We do with housing what we've done with many other industries, such as healthcare. So, to a large extent, healthcare used to be unaffordable for the vast majority of people, both in the Isle of Man and Britain. What we did in response was the government post-war, they never had a lot of money, but they built the NHS. The NHS is now probably the most respected institution, both in the Isle of Man and in the UK. And we guarantee this as a human right, in the same way that housing should be guaranteed as a human right for most people. I mean, by increasing the stock and making sure that if you need a council house, you can have one, or if you need increased sort of mid-rent schemes or rent-to-buy schemes at the end of the day, or even sort of like helping saving schemes. These are all ways of sort of creating that path toward home ownership or creating cheap rents where we can afford our own homes one day.
No, it's the basic idea that extreme poverty and involuntary homelessness shouldn't be seen as societally acceptable on any scale, never mind a large one. And I guess it's all about moving society to a place where no one is left vulnerable to factors like that.
But let's say you get to the stage where we implement this. There's then always the question. I get this question with climate change. How do you then fund it? That's what times. That is the key question for any of this, really.
Well, I mean, there's three ways we can fund this. So, A, if we look at like the cost of housing, we have to recognize that we're already funding it, right? We're already paying for this. We're paying this in the fact that like, if someone ends up homeless, then you end up paying for them to be processed through the healthcare, the criminal justice system, and the courts, which is far more expensive than just housing people. I mean, a study in Canada and another one in Finland showed that housing people rather than leaving them homeless, and we say there's no homeless people here, but people couch surf. I mean, it's an invisible problem.
There is homeless here.
I mean, it's 7 times cheaper to just help people get housing because then they can get stable long-term employment at the end of the day. So A, we're already paying for it. B, if the government buys real estate, this is an asset that the government's going to own long term one day. So it's simply going to be something that like it increases the number of assets the state has. So it's a wise financial investment to invest in government housing. And then thirdly, we could issue bonds. I mean, bonds are an incredibly successful way. Lancashire recently sold some bonds, and they sold the first 150 million, and there was immediately demand for more. So the money is out there, especially at a time of really, really low interest rates. This is the best possible time to do it.
But surely we see with obviously increasing housing stock, you decrease the price totally. But if you don't decrease that price, you still, as a private citizen, if I had a house and I wanted to put that on the market, should I not be entitled to choose that price?
No, you still can choose the price, but in general, what we see is another concern is we've got a lot of people who, on paper, are this is a bigger problem in London, but the way our housing prices are growing, maybe it'll hit you too. You've got a lot of people who are paper millionaires, and but they can't really sell or move that asset on, or if you want to upgrade your home, the value of upgrading or moving to a larger home is more expensive, so you still lose out at the end of the day because you sell your asset, you still need somewhere to live, and if prices keep growing up, that 10, 20, 30, 50 grand that you've made from increasing house prices, you need to plow into another property and you might even be at a loss. So as a private citizen, yes, it should be left up to the market. But in general, we need to recognize that it's not just market forces at play. There are certain restrictions that are driving up the housing prices. So the fact is, because a lot of people in China are saving money, this gets pumped into credit markets in Western banks. And this eventually leads to an instance whereby this money filters in, and that's the money that you use actually in your mortgage. So we need to have protection for people here from the forces of the global economy.
I think another point that I think we wanted to talk about was the automation of work.
Yes, you mentioned maybe to speak about this and the possible danger it posed economically for the island.
Yeah. So I do apologise for diving into sort of somewhat technical topics, but something the government needs to sort of focus on today is what are the risks that future sort of technology does pose toward our workforce. So what is one of the largest sort of forms of work on the Isle of Man? Can you guys think of large forms of work?
Engineering.
Engineering, yeah.
I think the financial services industry
Yeah.
is probably the large, and
Those
e-gaming,
are the big
e-gaming
ones.
as well.
Yeah.
Gaming,
I mean, another one of the largest ones itself is driving, right? Whether it's being a taxi driver, being a bus driver, or being a truck driver, it employs incredible amounts of people on the Isle of Man. Communications and transport is the single largest sector in the Isle of Man. And when self-driving cars come in, a lot of these people are going to be put out of work. Just telling them to go out and sort of like code and get a job one day is not going to be sort of good enough in sort of replacing this level of work for them. What are we going to do with them? Secondly, when it comes to places like e-gaming software, a lot of software is not only being automated, but because we have the capacity to work from home now, it means it's much, much, much easier to take the high-paying jobs we have over here and outsource them to places like China, India, Bangladesh, Vietnam, or even South Africa. Which means as though the same way that we saw deindustrialization in Northern England that many communities still haven't recovered from today, we're going to see the same thing hit our services or IT industry one day. And maybe this one day is going to happen relatively soon. And we need to be prepared in sort of to help reskill people for this. So what we, particularly within the Manx Labour Party, would like to see happen is the government take a proactive approach in sort of making sure people are ready for the changes in the economy. If we give people a greater stake in the economy, then theoretically, if more of your work is being outsourced to India, it means a lower workload and maybe higher wages for you at some point as you can move into higher skilled work as the lower end work is sort of like taken away. Or B, maybe if you've got the access to sort of like free education long term or lifelong education, you can decide that, okay, my career or my industry is gone. When I hit 30, you can retrain and still have 35 years in another career. So lifelong education is essential to make sure that the Isle of Man is ready to handle changes to its economic structure.
Yeah, because it's vital to have a workforce that can adapt to a new working environment, which will inevitably occur over time. Like there's no working environment ever remains a constant forever.
I mean, even if you look at things like law, I mean, I don't know if any of you guys are going to study law at some point, but even the... Are you going to
No.
study?
I'm too dumb for that.
Oh, no, absolutely not. But if you
No.
look at law, I mean, if you look, the majority of the legal profession, I mean, a lot of it, or a large part of lawyering happens in the discovery phase, where you go through old case law and you find stuff you find precedents through which to build upon a case.
Yeah.
This is viewed as highly skilled work, but this is already being automated or being replaced by machines. Which means that even secure sort of white-collar professions are going to face this, and we need to have a government that sort of prepares and is ready for the future.
Well, I suppose it does. It does if you take away the human aspect, it does make work more efficient. If you do have the automation of these machines, you look in kind of with the police, for example, they can use an AI. So instead of having to watch 24 hours of film on CCTV footage, they can say we only want the bits where people are actually moving. So then the AI can source it, and they cut out 80% of the time they need to do that.
Yeah.
So
But again, this
there's benefits to it.
wouldn't be proposing, stop automation. It would be
No,
proposing
yeah.
giving people whose jobs are becoming automated a new opportunity to invest and re-enter the economy and the workforce.
Just
Yeah.
like everything, Sam, there are good parts
And
and bad parts.
And bad parts,
Yeah.
yes.
If people, or if like, so the way Germany has a really good model of handling part of their workplaces, they've got a policy of co-determination, which means Germany is not a socialist country by any means, and no one's advocating for anything like that. But if we look at Germany, like, they've got a policy of co-determination, which means workers elect a representative, sometimes as many as half the members of the board, which means the company is governed in the interests of both shareholders and the employees of that company. If this were to happen, automation wouldn't be something we were afraid of. Automation would be something that would benefit us. If 80% of my workload was decreased, maybe I could become far more productive, and like the amount of money I get due to that productivity would increase. Maybe automation would be really, really good for workers of a company if some of the harder, more tasks that cause more drudgery were sort of if they were liberated from that.
No, I could agree there. Yes.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense that automation should be something that benefits people outside and inside the workforce. There's no reason for it to only cater to a certain class or group within a society.
Well, it should benefit everyone on the whole because it cuts out the jobs that we don't want to do.
Yeah.
Which I think is
Which
pretty
there
fair.
are always jobs that people don't.
Well, obviously, how we do that, how we go about that is kind of that's the main issue. Yeah.
One thing that we do find quite interesting is if you look at the way government rhetoric has changed from the beginning in the middle of the pandemic to now. I mean, I remember we had this big sort of, the way we discussed sort of like essential workers. Thank you, essential workers, for keeping the economy going. But now that we've all sort of come out of our homes, and now that the accountants and sort of like software engineers are back out there and working in the economy, cashiers, the people who sort of like deal with the bins, workers, nurses, people who deal with like things like sewage, people who actually do driving, transport, delivery, critical communications, they're just as essential as they were during the middle of the pandemic. But what we haven't seen is any sort of compensation or wage rises that sort of reflect how essential they are for the economy. I mean, we need to have an economic system that sort of like says, you're incredibly valuable, well done teachers, well done nurses, and sort of allocates them resources on that basis.
Sorry to disagree with you here, Devon, but I work in a local supermarket, and we were given a bonus for 2 months during the pandemic.
Okay.
And we've been given Boxing Day off this year, so...
So some pretty radical changes
I have to disagree there.
Well, perfect. Well, thank you very much for your contribution toward keeping the country afloat. Enjoy your Boxing Day off. I hope it feels like it's enough.
And on that happy note, I'm terribly sorry, but it is time to end. We're out of time, so yeah. Thank you so much for coming on, Devon. Thank you for being here.
So much coming on.
Yeah. And thank you very much. Thank you for everyone listening.
Quickly,
Yeah.
before do you just want to kind of plug yourself?
Where can we find you?
Yeah. So you can find me on Facebook. I will be setting up a Twitter account at some point when I eventually get around to it. But you can find both the Manx Labour Party and Devon Watson, Douglas Councillor, on Facebook if you're interested. If you're looking to meet, you can also just send a message there, and we can discuss if you've got any concerns. Feel free to reach out to me.
Oh, thank you. Oh,
Thanks. Hugs and kisses.
Merry Christmas again.
PolitiBabble.
Yeah, Happy New Year as well.